I would like to introduce my best friend, longtime hero. Marilyn Strickland's the mayor of Tacoma, Washington. And we actually, in seriousness, we met about a year ago in Berkeley, California, when we were on a panel together for the Mayor's Innovation Project. And proudly on the panel with us was Mayor Scadota from Little Rock. And I think the mayor has so Little Rock is in the house. Yay. Excellent. Which is another fabulous mayor and another fabulous project that's going on. And I just wanted to say a couple things about the mayor. She's got sort of a perfect Tacoma, Washington story. She was actually born in Seoul, Korea, before moving here to the Tacoma area, worked as an executive at Starbucks and in the Seattle Public Library, and as the son and grandson of librarians. That's a part of your biography I care about most. And what's amazing to me is that she's an example of exactly what we're trying to help foment across the country, right? The ArtPlace success will really be that anytime a mayor sits down to have a conversation about the future of her community, arts and culture is talked about in the same tone and with the same frequency as housing, as transportation, as public space. And this is a mayor who I've heard talk about the 220,000 direct and indirect jobs that are coming to Tacoma, and how we have to make sure that those are equitably distributed and that these are quality jobs, and then go on to talk about the Museum of Glass, which is my second favorite museum in the United States. So if anyone has time, go there. And if you don't have time, there's a live webcam of the hot room that you can watch glass blowing, which is extraordinary. But they've got great murals. I know Philly Mural Arts is here, so don't get jealous, but Tacoma has an extraordinary mural program as well. They have Art at Work Month. They do sort of lots of wonderful things. And so we're really thrilled that Mayor Strickland was able to take some time with us and help talk about the place that we're in a little bit beyond the sort of immediate bounds of Seattle, and get us to think about the city of Tacoma, which was in Sunday's New York Times crossword puzzle that I was doing on the train here.
And mentioned on Saturday Night Live.
And mentioned on Saturday Night Live. So yeah, so we're in the Tacoma moment. So let's keep the Tacoma moment going. Please join me in making Marilyn Strickland feel welcome. Mayor Strickland.
Well, thank you everyone for allowing me to be your guest this morning. I am Marilyn Strickland. I have the honor of serving as mayor of Tacoma. And for those of you who don't know where Tacoma is, we're about 35 miles south of Seattle, which translates into 95 minutes of traffic if you're in a car. Now, one of the things I want to talk about today is just the importance of arts in how we think about civic life. And typically and historically, people have thought about the arts as something that is elitist, something that isn't necessarily accessible to most people. And I want to talk about how we have woven the arts into the fabric of how we conduct business in the city of Tacoma, which is really important. But I want to back up a minute and just kind of tell the story of my city. So if you had asked people about Tacoma 20 years ago, people would have probably described it as a polluted industrial town. And I tell folks that when I graduated from high school back in the day, I was leaving, I was not coming back, and I said goodbye to my hometown. I went to college, I worked a while, I went to graduate school, and when I came back to Tacoma in the 90s, I saw something different happening, and a lot of it had to do with the arts. At the time when I returned back to my hometown, we were renovating our Performing Arts Center, and I remember being a volunteer there, and that was really the catalyst that got me engaged in civic volunteerism. So Tacoma now has a plan that is called Tacoma 2025. And that was the result of thousands of residents getting together to talk about the vision of where they want to see our city go and where we want to arrive in the year 2025. I describe Tacoma today as an international waterfront city that is now a leader in education, the arts, and environmental stewardship. Our high school graduation rate when I took office was 55%. Today it's 83%, which is higher than the state average. And there's a story about the arts that relates to that. We had a polluted waterfront. We were number 3 on a Superfund site around the country, only behind Boston Harbor. We are now reclaiming our waterfront. We've cleaned it up. You see restaurants, condos, housing, so a lot of revitalization happening. And of course the arts, an integral part of who we are. And when I think about the priorities that our residents said that were important, arts and cultural vitality rose to the top of the list. They talked about the arts being inclusive, They talked about arts being accessible. So as we look at what we're trying to do as a city, it's incredibly important to think about how the arts have played an integral part of what we're doing. So one thing that we try to do is activate public spaces. Now this space that you see here is called Tolleson Plaza. And with really good intentions, architects and engineers developed this space downtown, but it sits empty most of the time. So we said to ourselves, how do we find ways to activate the space? So this is just one example of just dumping a bunch of alphabet letters, and for a month, people were able to put up words and do things and talk about phrases that were important to Tacoma. This was a very interactive type arts project, but it brought life to a very empty space. Another way we activate space is just thinking about how it can be used. And so what we did was we did pop-up events. So we had a pop-up putt-putt golf, and these were within the museum district by the Tacoma Art Museum, by the University of Washington, Tacoma. And again, being creative, not necessarily spending a lot of money, but finding ways to activate space through activity, through the arts, and really doing something fun that gets people engaged. The thing about this is what happened is that I would actually see and hear about people going downtown just because they wanted to participate in these events. And so it's celebrating the arts, it's beautifying the space, but it's actually drawing people as a magnet to a downtown space. Now this is really cool here because this is what you see. The building that you see behind us is actually the Tacoma Housing Authority, so it is affordable and low-income housing for our residents. And we have a thing in Washington State where it's called 1% for the arts. And so every time there's a public project that is built, whether it's transportation or housing, we allocate 1% of the budget, and we have to put that towards some sort of an arts project. So by having 1% for the arts as part of our policy making, it means we have resources to do great arts projects and enhance the beauty of things. So this is the Tacoma Housing Authority project. You see the arts that we have on the wall, even the way that we've decorated the planters, but really with the philosophy that when we have low-income housing or when we have housing for all income groups, it should be beautiful. It should be aesthetically pleasing because everyone is entitled to be around beauty and art. So this is a fantastic story I like to tell, and this is about the Lincoln District. When I became mayor, one thing I wanted to do was to invest in neighborhoods that have historically not been invested in. And everyone always wants to invest in downtown and the sexy, well-to-do neighborhoods. But investing in some of the underserved neighborhoods is a hard labor of love because you don't see the results right away. So this is the Lincoln Business District. Back in the day, it was full of thriving businesses. It is anchored by Lincoln High School, which is the high school in our city that serves the highest poverty population with the most immigrants and the most diverse. It is by far the majority minority high school in our city. And this neighborhood historically had a very strong Asian presence. This started getting riddled with crime. People were divesting. They were moving out and moving away. And one thing we started doing was saying, okay, let's invest in infrastructure, in streetscape. Now, nothing is more sexy than infrastructure, right? And we said if we revitalize a street, make it more pedestrian friendly, it will improve. Well, to their credit, our staff said, no, let's make it a revitalization of the entire neighborhood. Now, a lot of the business owners in this district are people who do not speak English very well, so we actually went door to door with a really big idea. Let's hire someone who speaks the language, primarily Vietnamese, and get them engaged in the project. So for the first time, we had all these business owners engaged in this neighborhood revitalization project where for years we could get no traction at all. We talked about the importance of beautification, of making it more pedestrian and user-friendly, but also incorporating the arts into this. So at the entrance, we actually are going to have gateways and lighted columns leading into the Lincoln Business District. And this is what you would typically call your international district, very, very Asian flavor. So we hired an artist and we got local input about putting up benches, streetscape, entering, and how we beautify the entire area through art. We created new banners. We went door to door and we said to folks, how can we help you beautify your facade? How do we make it better? And by doing this, we actually have created this big wave of momentum where people are actually rediscovering the Lincoln District, a district where people historically really didn't feel comfortable visiting. They're now visiting restaurants. We just opened a new supermarket there. Some of the restaurants that typically had a small number of clientele are now becoming destinations. And by no means is this over. And one thing that's incredibly important about this revitalization project is that we don't want to go in there and just totally wipe out the patina of the history. We want to be very respectful of the culture and the people who have been there for a long time, but also uplift with more amenities to make this a destination neighborhood. So as we look at the art, we're looking for cultural competency, respecting the input of the people who've been there for a long time, and not saying to folks, we want to push you out and make it all fancy and shiny. We want to keep the mood and the vibe, but also bring arts to it to make this a destination for the entire city. So this is People's Community Center. And back in the day, this was called Malcolm X Community Center. And this is in our Hilltop neighborhood, which for some of you who are local know that this was one time a neighborhood that was notorious for gangs and crime. Since then, we have worked really hard to revitalize the neighborhood. Now, this People's Community Center had a swimming pool that was shut down by the city. And those of you who work in city government know that swimming pools are expensive to build and really expensive to maintain. People just don't like doing that. But we said to ourselves, Hilltop should have nice things too. So as we passed our transit measure last November, you will see light rail come up to this neighborhood through the entire length of the Martin Luther King Jr. corridor. And I tell people that when I visit cities around America, the first place I want to go is MLK Boulevard, because the way MLK Boulevard looks tells me more about equity and how a city treats its residents than anything else. So right here on MLK Boulevard is People's Pool, and we work with the Parks District. We reopen the pool. It has a spray ground. It has beautiful light, and it's been very successful since its reopening. But we also had an element of art here as well. So what we did was we said we want artists to work on public art, but we want people from the neighborhood. And we want to make sure that artists of color have an opportunity to be part of this whole process. So we built a community, we developed a community-based mural. We did portable works purchases, and the project itself is an oral history of the neighborhood itself. And this is what we had. Lots of participation. People talking about folks they knew back in the day, but really trying to tell the story of this neighborhood. And as you may guess, when I talk about Hilltop and I talk about light rail coming and more businesses and bringing things there, people are often afraid of gentrification because we want to make sure that we are not pushing people out because this becomes a more desirable neighborhood. This is a mural that we put on the side of the building, again, telling the history of Hilltop, going back to what it was like in the 70s. You see Buffalo Soldiers here, and you see the community playing, and really just creating a really strong sense of neighborhood and community. And the idea was, we want everyone who lives in this neighborhood to be able to come up to this mural and maybe see someone or see some situation that seems familiar to them. Because when a neighborhood is evolving and changing, we want to make sure that people maintain a sense of place and home and permanence. This was a dedication for the mural. The community was incredibly excited, and you see the gentleman wearing the hat and the jacket looking forward. He is someone who has been a champion for getting that pool renovated for the past decade, and for him to stand there to see a renovated pool and to watch this arts happening, it was a very emotional moment for him. And we wanted to share this picture with you because it just really captures a sentiment of what it means to this community to see this happen. So that is the end of my presentation. Overall, I just want to say this. As we think about urban places and communities and cities, the arts have a very integral part of it. As Jamie mentioned earlier, when I talked in Berkeley about the importance of the arts in our community, the arts represent an economic engine. The arts represent a way that we can bring equity into our decision making. The arts represent a way to beautify a city. But more importantly, the arts really find ways for people to connect emotionally to places. As someone who works a lot in urban planning and construction, we often talk about buildings and setbacks and heights. But what we often forget is that place is how people feel when they interact with their built environment. And by building places that include the arts, by making arts a civic priority, it's a way to revitalize cities, it's a way to get people engaged, but it's also a way just to share beauty. And when we look at people from all different income levels, the thing I always say is that every neighborhood should be able to have nice things. And by showing you Hilltop, the Lincoln District, and why we've made it a priority, we get to say to everyone, Tacoma can have nice things too. So thank you very much. I will be happy to take any questions if you want me to do that. Yes, ma'am. Who are you? Hi, Deborah.
beyond infrastructure, when you're developing neighborhood programs, do you have business incentive programs or anything that helps people to enter the business sector and provide some of the services that are in these in the neighborhoods you renovate?
So her question is, do I have any incentives for, I'm going to presume, small businesses who want to be part of these neighborhood projects? Definitely. So we were very lucky during the Obama administration to get a $3 million grant from the Department of Commerce, and it's the Minority Business Development Association grant. And so the purpose of this grant is to help small women and minority-owned businesses get a leg up and understand basics from writing a business plan to getting access to capital. So that's one way we're doing that. But when we think about different neighborhoods, economic development in cities is often about who can give the biggest tax break to the biggest company to come from city A to city B. And that really doesn't do anything to help anyone, because we know that small businesses are the places that tend to be more generous to neighborhoods and more likely to hire local people. And so we do everything we can to incorporate small businesses. And also, too, when we have artists participate, we pay them. So, I don't like the idea of asking artists to do stuff for free, because they're trying to make a living, too. And so I want to make sure that as we talk about how we hire, that we're looking for opportunities to have artists actually make money, and also to introduce it into other programs that we have in the city. And I'm going to do a commercial for 1 second. We have a program called Spaceworks. And Spaceworks is really special because we take vacant property, vacant storefronts, and in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, we help small micro businesses set up shop there without having to pay rent. And so they have to pay their utility bill, their technology and phone bill, but it gives them a chance to get a leg up, build a customer base, and then hopefully transition into being able to pay rent. And our success rate is probably about 65–70%, which is pretty high for small businesses. And we've got great success stories about people staying in spaces and being able to pay rent, or actually moving on because they got too big and they grew. So those are a couple of things that we do, but it is entirely possible. And I tell people, please always pay your artist. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. What's your name? Hi, Phyllis. Yes. So a question she asked is, what kind of a training program do we have for artists? And we have a couple of different things, because we have an arts commission, which is comprised of 17 people, and every year we give away funding to artists. It's a competitive grant process. And so in that process, we want to try to make sure that we are being equitable and inclusive, but also supporting artists with different types of skill sets and training. With Spaceworks as well, because those are creative enterprises, which are often artists, we provide business training, professional development, and really helping them understand what it may take to go to market with what they're doing. Now, people love art for the sense of art and creativity, but you know what? People got to eat too. And so we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to make money and to profit from the art that they're doing. Yes, ma'am.
We were given a brief intro to you and your background, but I didn't see or didn't hear an arts background, and I'm just wondering how you were able, or what was your vision that brought arts into your design and your planning and your economic development planning?
Actually, I do have an arts background.
Oh,
I
I'm
took
sorry.
piano lessons when I was 10.
Oh, okay.
So that does count. No, you know what? It was a purely strategic decision, thinking about what our strengths were as a community and how we could differentiate ourselves. And Tacoma is a city that has a lot of old historic property. We have these amazing historic theaters downtown. So that's really what started me into thinking about the arts as civic and cultural assets that a city can leverage. And then we started looking at the arts community and saying to ourselves, okay, there's a community here that wants to do more. And if they got the right support, they could actually grow and blossom. And so there's no background that I have in the arts other than my piano lessons that I took for 8 months when I was 10 years old. But I'm a lover of the arts. I appreciate the arts. And we want to make sure that we can find a way to make our city stand out. And so it's pretty, when you think about the cognitive dissonance that happens between an industrial town and the arts, it seems like there's no match. But by doing that, it was kind of a bold statement saying that we know that we have something to offer. And by having those different types of, almost a contrast, more than anything, it says that we are an inclusive city that respects all people. Yes, sir.
So have you initiated any kinds of
Yes, so his question is, have I initiated any relationships with the surrounding tribes? So Tacoma has a great relationship with the Puyallup tribe of Indians. And we work with them a lot with different types of projects. And when we have opportunities to participate and have them be part of our arts program, we absolutely invite them. When I do events, I usually often have them doing the opening prayer and giving us grace. And so when we think about the arts, they definitely have to be inclusive, and the Puyallup Tribe of Indians is a big partner with us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meredith from Detroit, and I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that 1% for the arts that's set
Yes.
aside in public projects, and then does it also apply to public-private projects, and then how have private developers kind of
Yeah.
responded to that?
So, for example, we have transit agencies, Sound Transit, which builds this big regional transit system. When we do public works projects, when we have something that's funded by the Housing Authority, we have 1% set aside for the arts. And I don't know if that's necessarily a state policy or a city policy, but I think we adopted it as a city. And I think there was a time when we didn't do it, but we do it now. And so we've just decided that if we have 1% allocated to the arts, it assures us that there is a component of the arts with most publicly owned projects. So if you look at Sound Transit, for example, at the stations, you will see large public art projects. And what's cool about those public art projects is that it's a way to get the community in on the project you're trying to build and help them understand why you're doing what you're doing. No, 1% comes from public. Yeah, because that's the part we really control. Yeah. Now, if a private partner wants to join us, they can be part of that, but it's 1% for the arts from public investments. Okay. Yes, one more, and then I'm going to get off the stage because Jamie's giving me the hook. I know.
Good morning. So my question to you is, so after your 10 years over in your leadership position, what sort of sustainability could happen after a new leadership comes in? Because I know for a lot of tribes, that's what happens. Leadership changes, it's not consistent. So what are your thoughts about that?
That's a really good question. So she says, how do you sustain leadership and priority for something like the arts when people don't run for office anymore, they're termed out? And this is my last year. So one way we do that very strategically and intentionally is that we create the infrastructure at City Hall. So we now have a Department of Arts and Cultural Vitality that is staffed. That's not going away with the next mayor. We also have identified in Tacoma 2025 our strategic plan that included thousands of residents, arts and cultural vitality as a priority. That's not going to change. So one of the things that you get to do as a leader who's elected is you can say this is a priority, but if you don't create the infrastructure to make sure it stays there, it can go away. The infrastructure is there. People have identified it as a priority, and we're working on projects that are just starting now that will keep going long after I'm gone. But really, really good question. Thank you. All right, I'm going to get off the stage now. Thank you, everyone, for letting me speak to you, and have a great conference.
And just one thing before you go, and I'm not making this up, but I just got an email, this is a little bit creepy, but I just got an email from Bloomberg Philanthropies who are very angry that I did not include what an amazing partner you've been with the What Works program for cities that they're doing, both in terms of how you're using data as a management tool at the city and in terms of how you're making data open and available to the public for other uses as well. So I just wanted to add that, amend that for the record, get it on tape, and get us out of trouble.
Right.
So please join me in thanking the mayor one last time for being
Thank
with
you.
us. Thank you. That was really great.
I'm going to sit
Thank
down.
you so much. Okay, perfect. All right, so now I'm going to vamp for 3 minutes while we do a quick stage transition into the next plenary we're doing. And for those of you who are sort of following our work at ArtPlace closely, you know that there are 10 sectors of community planning and development that we track. And Jamie Hand, who leads our research efforts, has been doing an investigation of those sort of sector by sector. And at the end of the summit, we're going to spend a couple days thinking about the intersection of arts and culture with energy and the environment. And we're really excited that we'll be doing that with the support of the Helicon Collaborative, and I think Holly and Alexis are here in the room somewhere in the back waving. We're doing it with GRIST, and you'll see the CEO of GRIST in a minute. We're doing it with NRDC. And so what we wanted to do, sort of for our sake, but also because we think it's a really great conversation for all of us, is to spend a little time not just thinking of places as collections of people, but also spend some time thinking about places that don't have as many people in them, and think about the land, and think about the natural resources, and think about the role of arts and culture in that. And one of the issues, and I think in some ways Han-Min's question was sort of getting at this, which is one of the big things that the environmental sector struggles with, is how do you help someone solve a problem they don't know they have? right? And so much of the environment can be invisible to us in a moment-to-moment way. And one of the things that we're going to investigate are some of the ways that artists, that culture bearers, that arts organizations can help, and I'm going to use my least favorite verb in the English language, visibilize some of the things that we need to do today in order to make sure that our children have a tomorrow. So I'm really excited, as you know, about every plenary panel, but I'm especially excited about this one. We have 3 extraordinary colleagues and an extraordinary moderator. The first, we're making do this panel because he and I were actually scheduled to meet in Abingdon, Virginia about a month ago, and he was struck down with the flu. And that's Burt Lauderdale, who's the executive director of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. And they're an organization that's doing really extraordinary organizing, planning, and policy around a transition to a just economy. And how do we sort of pivot from a coal-based economy in Central Appalachia, in Kentucky, and other parts of the country, and move into one that is more deeply rooted in equity and health and sustainability. He'll be joined on stage by Lahua Simon, and for those of you who've applied to ArtPlace in the last 2 or 3 years, you know that there's a video component to the application, and I believe that Lahua has the award for the best video we've received. So if you haven't seen it, we'll send it to you, because it captures everything that's happening in a wonderful way. But she's working on Maui, and really thinking about how artists can be organizers and help the community come together and think about a transition from a sort of mega industrial complex of agriculture, sugarcane, and think about more locally rooted sustainable practices, particularly ones that can feed the public school students. And then Dee Dee Taylor, who's working in Bozeman, Montana, trying to do exactly that visibilization of how do we make sort of water issues apparent to us. And for anyone who was lucky enough to be in Margie Waller's breakout session, when she was sort of doing the moment on what we think of as a watershed and what actually is a watershed, I think that's some of what Dee Dee will bring into the conversation. And then the moderator is Brady Walkinshaw, who's the CEO of grist.org. And I am simply going to quote exactly from the website that grist is, quote, an independent, irreverent news outlet and network of innovators working toward a planet that doesn't burn and a future that doesn't suck. So I think that's awesome. So please join me in making feel welcome next plenary, which will not suck.
Well, I am thrilled to have the chance to facilitate this morning panel, and I also just want to thank Mayor Strickland again for joining us from Tacoma. My grandmother was born in Tacoma in 1926. And unbeknownst to her, she's a great fan of Mayor Strickland. So thanks for all the work you're doing on arts and culture in the city of Tacoma. So maybe another round of applause for Mayor Strickland. So in setting this panel up, we were shared, the moderators were shared this document that was titled The Art of the Elegant Interruption. So I will use that very sparingly. But we are really excited to have a conversation here with a terrific group about placemaking, creative placemaking, arts, the environment. I'm with GRIST, which, as was shared, is an organization, online media organization that works on environmental news and journalism nationally, and previously was in politics. I was a state legislator here in Washington State, so have been kind of on multiple sides of the issues that we're talking about. So I'm excited to have this great panel here and wanted to open just by asking each of our panelists just to introduce themselves and perhaps share something that is inspiring them about their work today. So just to take a couple minutes and share something that's inspiring them about their work today and introduce themselves. So please.
Great, yeah. Dee Dee Taylor, Bozeman, Montana, and we live in a watershed community. So it's a closed basin. It's a beautiful valley surrounded by mountains and covered with snow, which is our water source. So our source of water is snow and springs, which run through creeks and wetlands and irrigation canals to a river, and then eventually to the headwaters of the Missouri River. So just to situate us there a little bit. We're facing lots of threats. Drought, climate change, and population growth, explosive growth. And so that is, just to sort of keep this short and get to the question, that's what we are engaging with to try and use art to help with this anxiety around population growth and drought, which we're seeing in many ways. One of our art events, our performance events, is taking place out on a historic ranch. And so we're doing a multidisciplinary performance, and one aspect of that is to make the irrigation system in a pasture that's flood irrigated in sort of a traditional way, and make the ditches and canals visible by illuminating those at dusk, and this is part of a performance. So one thing I love in general about what I'm doing is the connections and the people that we're meeting, interviewing farmers and ranchers and environmentalists and scientists. And so one day we went out to a neighboring ranch near the one that we're using, and we needed to convince a rancher to move some cows for about a week. And during this performance, because the cows would disrupt the illuminated system. So we got there and one Sunday morning with coffee and sat down with the family and explained this event and what was going to go on. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Absolutely not. We can't move the cows." But his daughter, who was sitting there and who is now managing part of the ranch, piped up and said, "Dad, this sounds really cool. Well, let's think about this a little bit." And so after about 20 minutes of discussion, we came up with some possible solutions, and one of which we'll probably be using. And he ended up taking us around and showing us more of the ranch in detail. So, and I'm hoping that he'll be there at the event and he'll see something that he's never seen before, some really novel public art, contemporary art, and that will switch his mind a little bit about how he thinks about water and his neighbors and his friends, and will extend more throughout this rural community. That is one of our challenges, is the divisiveness between the urban and the rural. So that's really an exciting moment for me. So this is the kind of public art that we do. This is a multidisciplinary projection on historic mill buildings. It was our pilot project last year. And this is a degraded part of town it's really a microcosm of early industrial development that made the city what it is. And it's used water in a canal system that went to that site. And so using the history and the culture and sort of the environment and our research around that at this site, we created last summer a 40-minute multidisciplinary sound, light projection that told the story, really the deep history from Native American use through today, and the water challenges that was faced there.
Please.
My name, aloha. Yeah, you guys are so good. Aloha kako, my name is Lehua Nani. O Lehua Nani ko'u inoa. But people can just call me Lehua or Lele if that's easier to say. And my project's called Ma Lama Lama Maui. Ma Lama Lama is made up of two words, Ma Lama and Lama. And Ma Lama means to care, and Lama is a torch or a beacon of light. So Ma Lama Lama means to care for the light, and it means illumination or enlightenment. So I chose this name for our project because right now our community is going through a big agricultural transition. If you fly into Maui, which I hope you all get to do, right now you'll see big green plots of land as you fly in. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that a little bit. So that's, Maui is called the Valley Isle, and that's because we have one big mountain, and then we have a couple little mountains, and then in between there is just a really big valley. And for 140 years, we've been sugar farming in the Central Valley of Maui, and just this year, they announced they're going to stop sugar farming, and so we're in a big transition point. And probably the transition from what's going on agriculturally now to what will be is going to be 10 years. It's a massive transition that affects us economically, environmentally, and socially. So it's a big change, and I applied for the ArtPlace grant for 2 years to create media and different kinds of artistic and cultural experiences for the community so that they would wake up to what's happening. There are varying levels of awareness on our island of the gravity of where we are right now. And for me, the gravity of it is that either we choose consciously to create a regenerative future for the island of Maui, or we don't do that, and I don't get to have children that are safe and healthy and sustainable on the island. So that's where I really think we are. We're in this crux of like, either we use this opportunity to change our island for a brighter future, or we remain in the level of food insecurity that we're at, which is if the boats stop coming to Hawaii, we have 3 days before the island starts to starve. That's where we're at because of the agricultural system that we set up 140 years ago. So now's our time to change, and I believe that if we create media about it, then more people will be aware of the choices we have to make now to ensure that the 10-year transition goes in the right direction. So go to the next slide. We work in expanding circles of influence. I love that the theme of this, the theme of our event is instead of looking at our differences, let's look at our influences, because that's a big part of how our project works. We start with a small circle of influence, and then we use that and we leverage that to grow it out exponentially over 2 years. So you can kind of see what our map looks like. We have milestones. So we hit the first milestone of gathering 10 local artists. They're called the Kuahi. Kuahi means ambassador in Hawaiian, and it's made of 2 words, which is ku, to stand up, and fire, ahi. So there are people that are willing to stand up for our agriculture using arts. And then right now we're in the midst of our next milestone, which is 100 manawahine. And manawahine means powerful women. And we work in 3-month launch cycles where we understand where we need to go, but we're able to be creative about the arts and culture we utilize for our community depending on the information we have about what's going on in our community. So just really quickly, I'll go to the next slide. And so right now we're working with women. We're co-creating a women's walk for water. We felt that focusing on water with women was a great way to bring in that part of our agricultural system, which is actually a really critical part where for the last century, they've been taking water from one side of the island, and I'm talking about like 180 million gallons of water from one side of the island, and they're putting, I don't know, less than half of that into the land and the communities. So why is this corporation taking so much water? And then the environmental impact of that, without having water that goes from the mountain to the stream, we lose native plant life and native animal life, food sources that Hawaiians have depended on for years. I mean, I can't get into the problems with not having just water that flows from mountain to the sea. So we're working with women. We're all going to dress in blue and teal, and we are going to walk from the mountain to the sea as a demonstration that we support the waters being returned to their streams and not being diverted anymore. And we also have an album about water. It's called Vai, that's the word for water. And if anybody would like to listen to this album, I may give it to you for free, and you are also welcome to purchase it from me for a $10 donation. And I'm on it. I'm number 2 on the CD. So.
I'm Bert Lauderdale. I'm the one from Kentucky, in case y'all didn't know. Right? And I live in eastern Kentucky on the edge of the Appalachian coal fields, and I work with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. So we are a 36-year-old grassroots organization. We describe ourselves as a community of people inspired by a vision, building new power for all of us. We are authentically statewide. We're based upon a model where we have local chapters. We're a statewide membership organization, but we have local chapters that are single or multi-county, literally from the west end of Kentucky all the way to the east, northern Kentucky outside of Cincinnati, Bowling Green, just north of Nashville. Pretty good coverage of the state. But we started in eastern Kentucky, in rural eastern Kentucky, in the coal fields of Appalachia, and have always worked on then issues related to coal, energy, natural resources, but and always in various sorts of alliances or at least relationships with traditional environmental organizations, but sometimes from a slightly different sort of perspective or starting point. We have a few key characteristics that we think describe our organization that are important to understand. People, a lot of people have sort of preconceived notions about community organizations. Probably not as many people have preconceived notions about community organizations as we like to think people have preconceived notions, but some people do anyway. We're actually better understood by our vision and our approach to change than by whatever set of issues we happen to be working on at the time. We really are, our purpose is to build grassroots power, and to build grassroots power to make positive, progressive change that is vision-oriented, that is resilient, that is long-term. And we are vision-oriented as an organization. We have a vision statement, which has really become more like the organizational theology. We have a set of goals that we refer back to all the time to try to align. We're a very diverse organization. Again, some things you may not know about Kentucky. And we intend to be inclusive, try to bring together unlikely allies, unlikely communities, unlikely constituencies. We were intersectional before intersectional was cool, right? We didn't know that that's what we were being, but we are extremely multi-issue in the way that we design our work and what we do. We have all of those local chapters have their own local issues, local concerns that they work on. That's a really broad range of things. But at a statewide level, when there's critical mass of interest in an issue or an issue arena that we can identify from multiple places, it becomes more of a statewide priority. And we have long-standing program of work around statewide issues or issue areas that includes economic justice. Real anchor of that is pushing for comprehensive statewide tax reform, but we work on other local and state and national issues in that arena. We have a body of work around voting rights, in particular restoration of voting rights for former felons. Kentucky has one of the worst public policies that is written into our Constitution about restoration of voting rights. If you commit a felony in Kentucky, you lose your voting rights for life unless you get a personal pardon from the governor, which works out okay for state senators and judges, and not so well for the other 240,000 Kentuckians that have permanently lost their right to vote. We have a long-standing, from day one, program of work that we call the Canary Project that is around land reform and natural resources, coal and energy issues. Coal has been really dominant political, social, and economic force in Kentucky for over a century. We sometimes describe Kentucky and eastern Kentucky, central Appalachia, as a region that has been experiencing the early economic, political, and environmental effects of climate change for about 100 years. And then we have a relatively new area of work that is very fast growing, that has become probably more aggressive than even some of those other program areas around what we call new energy and transition. We have been advocating for a just transition in Appalachia, in Kentucky, and really in the whole country to get beyond fossil fuels and to a sustainable economy and a survivable set of energy sources. It's a very similar sort of scenario where we are at a moment of a crossroads, and we have to decide about how we're going forward, because the old coal economy is in free fall in Appalachia, and it is at this point unclear what is going to take its place. So very similar to the situation on Maui. The answer, if I can sort of press I think it was intended to be a promise to be lax with the strategic interruption. of the facilitator, but I'm going to press it and see if actually it was a threat. The thing that I'm most excited about, I hadn't really intended to talk about this today, but it is really dominating our organizational conversation. We were a little alarmed by the results of the election, and in many ways, the impact at the national level was even worse in Kentucky for reasons that in 1 hour we don't necessarily have the time to go into. But we knew that we needed to do something different in terms of our organizing. So we've been around 36 years. We have 11,000 members. We have a staff of 24, which is essentially the largest our staff has ever been. It's been this very incremental growth of this organization. And we decided that we would institute an organizer apprentice program because we have a lot of young people who want to get into organizing but don't have the experience or the access. And we add an organizer position. We have 14 of those 24 organizers. So we thought we could stretch ourselves and do 6 apprentice positions for a year and a half. And they are fully paid positions with full benefits. Wow. They're full staff positions. And so we did an application process. And in 2 weeks from across Kentucky, we got 150 applications. We were a little bit overwhelmed at how many of them were good. Sometimes somebody they apply for one of our organizing jobs, and their cover letter says they've always wanted to be a nurse. But these were like, really sort of had read the job description and wanted to. This is what they wanted to do. And we did interviews, and we were stymied. We could not figure out how would we select 6 of these folks. And so through a process with our steering committee, we decided instead we would bring on 13. So starting June 1st, we're adding 13 organizer apprentices across the state with the express intent of being in conversation with Kentuckians, like getting. These are not office jobs, right? And they're not digital jobs, although there will be aspects that are both. But getting in community and talking to people. I should be clear that our steering committee, which is elected from those chapters, voted for this, decided we would go for it. I should also be clear we don't have the money, right? This is a real leap of faith. Real leap of faith that we think is the moment calls for, and it's an assertion not only of trying to be bold, but also trying to be bold in a certain direction and in a certain way with a commitment to real building that grassroots power that I talked about. And it's got me a little jazzed. I could talk about it some more if y'all have.
Well, that was great. Thank you. There are already a couple of common themes I think that are coming up. One is obviously fundraising, which emerged. But the other is politics, and I think at the risk of kind of diving into that kind of at the beginning, there's this great quote that I've always liked to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, who said, if poets knew more politicians and if politicians knew more poets, this world would surely be a better place in which to live, which I think rings true in a lot of ways. And I think in all of your work at the kind of the intersection, mostly coming from the environment, but also thinking about arts and culture. I was curious if you might kind of reflect a bit on how it is that you use kind of arts and culture to move for kind of the political changes at kind of a local level that kind of impact your work. So I don't know, perhaps we could start. Maybe we could start with Hawaii.
Okay. Okay, so let's go deeper into the water issues. So. One of the things where we have to address is that the corporation that owns the Central Valley land, which is 36,000 acres, they've been leasing water and the way it was illegal for them to lease the water for a long period of time. Okay, so instead of leasing the water for a long lease, like 30 years, they did 6 5-year leases for this land. For the water. And that's something they apply to our county council, and that gets approved. I think now it gets approved by our state legislator. So right now they're in a process of the judge said, hey, you guys have been just doing a long-term lease in short-term amounts, and you need to apply for a long-term lease. And they did that, and there was a bill that went up that was trying to make it illegal for them to do it. It's called HB This happened before we got our grant funding. And as a community, we needed to approve of this bill so that they couldn't lease the water anymore, so that there would be a more fair distribution of water on our island. But we did not amass the people power to pass HB 2501. And it was a tragedy. Like, literally, I cried that day when I knew that it wasn't, they could still lease this water in a way. And I just want to say, it's a lot of water that they get to have at a small amount of money, and then they sell it back to our county for extreme profits. So what's going on in Maui, I mean, I get emotional about it because it's so corrupted. And we have to fight corruption that is in our government because the corporation has ties inside of our legislation with our legislators. And it's not so apparent, it's not like it's very obvious, but if you look at what's happening, if you're really paying attention, you can see the mayor is connected to A&B somehow, and that's why they're getting this ability to make so much money off of our natural resources. And so it's a tension thing. Like, in my community, it's controversial for me to talk about water. One of the things we try to do with arts and culture is go to different powerful women in our community and have them talk about their connection to water. Not necessarily from an activist standpoint, and we can't do that. There's a lot of activists doing activist work, but that's butting heads. I hope I'm being coherent right now. I'm really nervous just to talk to all of you on a stage. But so what I'm trying to say is that we went and we created these beautiful videos of powerful women in a place on Maui that they feel the water is meaningful to them. So we have this native Hawaiian singer. She's in Iao Valley, which is, you know, a sacred valley of water for us. She's talking to us about vai, the water. She's talking about what's meaningful to her. And the interesting thing is that in Hawaiian, vai means what is valuable, what is precious to us. So water 2 times, it's what's valuable and precious to us. And for her to explain on camera those concepts, why water's valuable, and not necessarily from a standpoint of, yes, and A and B should not be able to lease the water. She never said that. And we're not saying anything like that. And we don't want to approach A and B from an antagonistic point of view. We want to empower our community using arts and culture from a more positive, proactive place. And so that's what I'm saying with arts and culture. We can talk about controversial issues in a way that I think is going to be more effective. It's more effective for me to rally my community around how important water is to us as a precious resource, instead of rally them around the fact that A&B has been ripping us off for centuries. You know.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. So it seems like a simple question, right? So there's certainly some examples. I was talking to Alex at breakfast about. I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks since I agreed to be on this plenary, and I've thought about it a lot, and I've gotten less and less clear every day. So maybe it would be better if this plenary was yesterday, but just be grateful it's not tomorrow. But, there are certainly some examples of ways that we have tried to incorporate art and culture into our organizing. Most recently, there's some of you all may be familiar with this thing called the Clean Power Plan. Was the Obama administration's effort to encourage states to reduce carbon pollution, a big climate initiative, and the method, the creative, bold, deeply problematic, and really ambitious method was to encourage each state to come up with their own plan for how they would hit these targets that were given to them. In Kentucky, both political parties said, "No way, we're not doing it. Right? We're not going to participate in that." And so we thought about the prospect of, can we try to tell them they really, really should, and see if they would listen to us. But instead, we decided if the political establishment in the state is not going to write this plan, we will do it for Kentucky. So we've actually spent the last 2 years in this very robust strategy all across the state to engage people in designing a just transition energy plan for the state of Kentucky, which is 90+% dependent on coal. It's some of the oldest infrastructure around coal. It's, you know, we have, Kentucky has been impacted by the coal industry, as I said, for over a century, and it's not really gone that well for Kentucky. The 5th District of Kentucky, the Eastern Kentucky Congressional District, in terms of cumulative quality of life indicators, health, education, child poverty, a whole host of quality of life indicators, ranks 435th of the congressional districts. So y'all know what another name for 435th is, right? It's last. That is the cumulative effect of this dependence upon this mono-economy, extraction economy, heavily polluting fossil fuel economy, and it is our identity, right? It is also part of what has become part of the identity, a major part of the identity of the state, and certainly of Eastern Kentucky. So trying to figure out how to have a conversation about moving from that somewhat nostalgic identity, looking back, to what is it we're going to do in the future in the midst of economic calamity is, you know, it's a challenge, right? So we decided we would design this strategy. It took 2 years. We did a lot of interviews. We did surveys. We invited people to send in information. But then one of the key things was that we set up these, you know, if you're the government and you're doing this, you have public hearings. So we decided we would have our own public hearings, one in each congressional district. There's 6 in Kentucky. And we turned them into like dinner theater public hearings. So we reached out to unlikely suspects in those communities and asked them to bring friends to a seat at the table event. It was much like this. You would bring 7 people and have a table of 8 from your labor union or from your school or from your local organization or your housing organization or from your from the public government there. And then we had community theater. We had locally sourced food. We had music. We also had a PowerPoint with like really dense slides of you know, energy-related material. And then we asked people to, around the table, answer a set of questions. And all of the questions were oriented towards, what do you want to see, right? What do you want to see the Kentucky's energy system look like in 15 years and in 30 years? And guided the conversation with that, rather than looking at how bad things are right now. What do you hate most or want to protect, or what are you most worried about? What do you want to see? And then people shared those, and we had 6 of those around the state. They were fabulous events, right? Some of those table reports were in Spanish. There were just a wide range of inputs. And then we had a summit where all of those folks came together for 3 days, and art and culture, from gospel singing to murals to other sorts of activities that were integrated into the whole summit, really gave it a sense of community and of culture. And 2 weeks ago, we released our Empower Kentucky plan. About an hour ago, we had a group of folks meet with the Energy Cabinet Secretary in Kentucky. So I assume Jamie's going to get an email about that too, that they've decided to adopt our plan in Kentucky. No, we know they're not going to adopt our plan, but it creates a host of opportunities for us, what we're calling a mosaic strategy going forward in regions and locally, as well as at the state legislature, for us to carry all that forward. So there's a lot of, I will stop, but there's a lot of examples of ways to integrate art and culture, but there is also a depth to this question of art, culture, organizing, and power, and political power that we can get into more in terms of like how, because we sometimes, you know, think we are utilizing culture, and in fact, culture is utilizing us, right? And culture is larger than any organizing, and it's larger than art influences and impacts culture. Culture determines politics, and politics makes these decisions on environment, on our water, on our air and land, on all of these things, and we have to have a better understanding of that.
Wow. Great. Yeah. So our university has a motto, which is mountains and minds. And some have said the former is easier to move than the latter. So I guess our conflict is a pretty common one, especially around the West and in the arid West. And it's between urban and rural, city and county. And I think the moving minds applies to everyone, right? So I can say, well, I live in the city, and we have quite a progressive city that has the only on-staff water conservation person in the state, only one dedicated to water conservation. And then in the county, there's sort of a distrust of planning and zoning and regulations. And so water, unfortunately, doesn't stop at the border and turn around, but we really need to collaborate. And as we went around and started this project and started talking to everyone, and especially conservation groups and environmentalists, and our area, the Greater Yellowstone region, has, I think, more conservation groups per capita than anywhere in the universe. And they all told us that, they have the knowledge, they have the data, they have the way forward, they have the arguments, but how do they get people to care? And that is a real conundrum, right? You can know all this, but unless we want to bring the unseen seen, as this discussion is about, but a lot of it can be seen. The climate change, it's evident. We see the evidence of it. We had, last summer, we had a fish die-off in the Yellowstone River, which is just one valley over, and that was due to low water and water that's too warm. And so parasites proliferated and got into the bodies of fish, and so dead fish floating on the top of the water and on the shore. Very disturbing, and it shut down the river for a month from any kind of fishing business is a big one in this area. So that was disturbing, and people saw it, but I don't think I ever saw in the press the words climate change or unusual warmth, right? It just wasn't really brought out into the open. So, how do we move those minds to really pay attention to what's happening, to let skiers know that, the seasons are shorter, and it's not just, that's just not just an accident. So I think that it's a very subtle thing working with art. And we work with art experiences that are enveloping. So their performance, their projection, their place-based, they're researched deeply into the history, the culture, the environment, what's going on today. They are participatory in that they bring in people. The research is conducted with the people who live there, and often they are actors in this work. And what we hear from people is that it's a communal experience. It's being in that space, in that temporal space that is that will be gone. It's sort of magical. It disappears when it's over. You feel, and when the subject is water, there's a feeling of community which we need to establish to collaborate between the different stakeholders to move forward, to build a kind of political will to maybe elect county leaders who are more open to the idea of planning, so that we're not covered in subdivision, so that we have smart planning that will be nodes of residential, and that we won't maybe have the million straws that are sort of sucking the water out through wells and the unregulated septic systems that are dangerous. So I think it's a nuanced, subtle thing that we're trying to do. Art events along with tours, so really personalized tours with naturalists in the land, seeing irrigation systems, understanding what people who really work with water every day what they know about the water and what they have learned over generations about how water moves and how it can be shared so that the rivers don't go dry. And so I think one of the most powerful things I've learned as a more of an urban resident is what amazing stewards agricultural people are. And we often think, well, they put fertilizer in the river and, it's poison and it's horrible. But more often than not, they are sharing and maybe giving up their water right for the next person down the line, and so that the river stays healthy. Wow. So I think we all have a lot to learn throughout this, and the many, many, many newcomers who are coming in. This is we're attracting thousands of people every year, and so we want to help them situate themselves.
That's great. So I'm going to ask one more question briefly, ask for brief answers, and then turn it over to the audience. But one was when I was introduced with Grist, our vision is this. It was introduced it's a bit cheeky. I mean, it's this idea that a planet doesn't burn in a future that doesn't suck. And we've found that humor is a really powerful way, and comedy is a very powerful way of talking about really serious issues. And for us, we kind of went through this evolution. It speaks a bit to this idea of just transition and art and culture, which was when we started 18 years ago, we were more about a planet that doesn't burn. And to us, that was more about the environment and warming, and how do we make the story of warming more relatable to people so that we didn't feel that it was so grandiose that we couldn't take action. But over time, the idea of a future that doesn't suck, that for us is more about people. And it's more about the fact that justice is vital to our work, and that transition to a planet that doesn't burn has to be done with thinking about equity and justice and telling the story of people who live on this planet. So that has been kind of the evolution for us strategically. And we do this annual comedy night in Brooklyn, and David Cross from Arrested Development hosts it. And we had it last Monday in Brooklyn. We had about 400 people in this warehouse. And he played on this a lot. And that's how we've used it, is kind of taking culture and comedy to talk about something that can be such a serious theme that people can feel removed from it. We had a call about 3 or 4 weeks ago as we were prepping this panel, and our friend from the land of Wendell Berry from Kentucky brought up this idea that he said a quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we all kind of thought about what that meant, this idea of culture eating strategy, and I'd never heard it before. I liked it. So I just wondered if you might all just expand briefly on what you mean by that idea of culture eating strategy, and maybe we'll start with you and then kind of go this way, and we'll keep the answers short so we have a little time for audience questions.
Briefly? I appreciate the question, mostly because I was afraid you were going to say, tell us a joke. I think I just sort of said it, right? Like, we have this sense of we're trying to do our organizing, and let's get some culture to help make that resonate more with folks. And in fact, and that usually comes in the form of art, right? But culture is perhaps a more expansive term. And so I think, briefly, the idea of community organizing is trying to build power, and we draw on various sources, including culture, and we've had great success with that in terms of trying to be reflective of the culture, or a grassroots organization governed by our members in all these different locales. We are careful about telling folks what their problems are. They determine a platform, et cetera. So we're of this place and then of this culture. But we've also had culture, especially in this contentious space around coal, energy, and transition, and like the future of the planet, used against us. So briefly, we had one of our biggest successes when it was in early years of this organization in the 1980s. We organized a statewide referendum, a constitutional referendum, where we had to win a statewide vote. We were a feisty little grassroots organization against the coal industry. It's the only time the coal industry has, in effect, been on the ballot. And it wasn't brief. I'd tell you more about it, but we had culture on our side. And we were able to utilize that some, but more than us strategically figuring out how to use it, we had culture on our side, which we tapped into. Our campaign was Save the Home Place. We had a lot of local artists, writers, et cetera, and we won that statewide campaign with 82% of the vote, winning in every county across the state. There's a lot of great components to that, and all of a sudden it was this king has no clothes experience for the coal industry. You know, legislators who had been problematic before, our folks would say to them that because they were committed to the coal industry, did you get 82%? You know, many of them who ran unopposed didn't get 82%. So time sort of fast forward a little while, the coal industry on a national scale, but especially in Appalachia, decided they were going to do something about that cultural divide. They had really put their thumb on the region. So they spent $40 million on a culture campaign. They created the Friends of Coal was sort of this highlight of this whole campaign. And like you could join Friends of Coal, you could get a Friends of Coal license plate. And at the same time that they were doing that, national environmental groups were launching this climate campaign saying coal sucks, right? And so we experienced in Appalachia a culture war, right? We were sort of ground zero for what people thought was an economic war or about environmental issues, and it was a culture war. And so Eastern Kentucky is still full of Friends of Coal license plates. You can join the Friends of Coal Women's Auxiliary. You can get a Friends of Coal golf bag, right? And they reasserted this culture. And so it is not like we oftentimes think that culture is our ally for us to draw on for the progressive causes that we have, but it is more neutral than that, right? And it is used against us, and we have to be mindful of how that gets shaped. What was your question?
We'll stop there. Thank you. Maybe do you want to comment a bit on that question about culture and strategy and then
well, I'm thinking that we're a little subversive. And so we are going back to the environmental groups who want to know how to get people to care. So we're sort of their tool in a way. So we want to help expand the idea, using sort of mind-tweaking experiences of art. So expand the idea of the public about water and water use and water future, and in a very sort of subtle way, hand it back to them, and hand it to the voters to maybe make some changes. Yeah, so we're working with culture. Yeah, we are culture.
You want to offer a final?
All right, so quickly, there is a Native Hawaiian artist called Napua Gregg, and last year she ran for county council. And I think someone did approach her and ask her, there was a grassroots organization that was supporting candidates that were more green and Hawaiian, based in Hawaiian culture and values. So she ran for county council last year and she didn't win. And she ran to represent my hometown, and I definitely voted for her, but she didn't win. That was a big tragedy. And then this year, they had to shut down Iao Valley because there was a big rain, and all the Hawaiians think that this rain was divine because it knocked out diversions and realigned the river the way it's supposed to be. And so the county shut down the valley. So this is a sacred spot that we receive manna from. We cannot go in the Iao Valley. And they shut it down so that the water company could re-divert the water. Okay, so for months, people on Maui, Hawaiian, not Hawaiian, we're all like, why can't we go to our sacred valley? What are you doing with the water? And this artist that did run for county council, and she didn't make it, she chose to create a hula performance about the 4 rivers of Maui called Nawai'eha. And every year there's this thing called Merry Monarch where all the hula halaus, the hula groups, come to Big Island and perform for the rest of the state. on television. And so she knew that this performance that she made would be seen on television. And then she applied to the county to be able to take her hula halau, her hula group, into the valley even though it was closed. And she asked permission from all of them, and then they gave it to her. The public works or whatever said, okay, for one day, you and your hula halau plus their families can go into the valley and perform before you go to Merry Monarch, the big hula competition. And it seems like just a small act, maybe. And she invited the mayor, she invited the woman that got elected instead of her, that is tied to the corporation, and all the other county council members. And to watch 20 women with big ipus, like ipus were our percussion instrument as well as our water carriers. So imagine 20 Native Hawaiian women in the valley with these big ipus, slamming them on the ground, hitting them, and singing for the waters of Maui. And then they do this thing, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna try to do it. They do this thing where they like matrix, and they go all the way back. Like they do it without their hands. They're like matrix on their knees, and then boom, boom, boom. Navaiha. So it's like, and she said to me, it's a brilliant, you can't watch it and not feel for what's really going on. And the woman, the Native Hawaiian artist, Napua Gregg, she said, I'm gonna sucker punch them with culture. and 3 days later, they opened the valley again. They reopened. So that's what I believe.
That's great.
Culture eats strategy.
So I think we have time for maybe one question from the audience. So if there's someone wants to follow that up, if there's one question out there. Here's the question.
In Kentucky, I was just interested, how has the popularity of J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, impacted the work you've done? Because my mind is blown by what you're telling me after reading that book. I had no idea that you could even get active in Kentucky.
It's an interesting question. Yeah.
Briefly? Briefly, it's had a large impact, right? No, I don't know how much impact it's had. I have the book with me. I don't know how much impact to say. I think the dynamic, is not unfamiliar, and I think the reality is much broader and more complex. So that's JD's story. We all are entitled to our story, but I think the reality is much more complex, and it is. We are a grassroots organization started in the hollers of Eastern Kentucky by Eastern Kentuckians, and have spread across the state. Very grassroots flavor to the organizing and to the folks that populate the organization. I think I don't know if folks know JD's book, but a piece that I think is really important in terms of that book and that argument is this question of inclusion and exclusion. And we had I really appreciate, I hope I get it right, I think it was Carol from Anchorage yesterday afternoon talking about it at the end of her talk up here about doing this work for everyone. And like I mentioned, we describe ourselves as building new power for all of us. And that sort of spirit of inclusion is really animating for our organizing, et cetera. I hope Eric is not here yet. I hear he's going to be here. I was just thumbing through the book that we got in our bags yesterday, and I just happened on this phrase that said the only source of power, or something about the only source of power has been inclusion in American history, and I don't think that's right. I think that the politics of exclusion has been really a driving force of this country and this democracy in spite of our rhetoric. Right, in spite of what we believe. It didn't say like all white men over a certain age who own property are created equal and have inalienable rights. There was other rhetoric there, but the reality has always been about exclusion, and that is I come from a region of the country that is tight knit and has a long history and shared identity and is in some ways very inclusive, and is feeling very excluded from the rest of, if not the American dream, at least the American promise, and maybe just even the American future. And that is a dynamic that folks are feeling all over the country. And the power of culture is such that culture can either drive the inclusion, as the examples here, right? It can either drive us in that direction, or it can be used, like the Friends of Coal, to drive theories of alienation and exclusion and separate us in ways that are not to our benefit.
Well, unfortunately, our time has eclipsed, so I want to thank our three panelists. To use a Grits term,